Get control of this, this group. All right. I am going to call the Wednesday, June 8th meeting to order, and if we could all rise for the pledge, please.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Sarah, would you call the roll?
Wheelock.
Yes, ma'am.
Klaus.
Here.
Johnson.
I am here.
Max Bauer.
Here.
I show Lathrop, Kropa, and Crawford as excused.
Thank you. This is our first opportunity for public comment. So, Sarah, if you would please read the rules.
Any person shall be permitted to address a meeting of the Board of Commissioners, which is required to be open to the public under the provision of the Michigan Open Meetings Act. Public comment shall be carried out in accordance with the following board rules and procedures. Any person wishing to address the board shall state his or her name and address. No person shall be allowed to speak more than once on the same matter, excluding time needed to answer commissioners' questions, if any. The chairperson shall control the amount of time each person shall be allowed to speak, which shall not exceed 3 minutes. The chairperson may, at his or her discretion, extend the amount of time any person is allowed to speak. Public comment will be solicited during the 2 public comment periods noted in Rule 5.4, Order of Business. However, public comment will generally be received at any time during the meeting regarding a specific topic currently under discussion by the board. Members of the public wishing to comment should raise their hand or pass a note to the clerk in order to be recognized and shall not address the board until called upon by the chairperson.
At this time, would anyone like to make public comment? Seeing none. Oh, certainly. Please.
Hi there. Good evening. And my name's Dr. Charlie Current, and I'm talking about the bell. And unfortunately, last night I woke up at 3 a.m. and laid there for 2 hours. Then I had to go to work at 5, and that was not good for me or people I anesthetize. So I've talked to a couple of sleep doctors, one in particular, and that it is not a healthy thing to have through electroencephalographic studies, even if it's subconscious for those who like the bell during 2, 3, 4, 5 a.m. You know, as I mentioned before, hypertension, potential for seizures, just adds all sorts of stress response. Downtown, again, is very, very quiet. The only disturbance we have is the bell. Sirens turn off their sirens that are going to the hospital. My neighbor, the 9 of us in a row homes, which are 18 people, you know, we're all in agreement. My neighbor, Jay Zilek, who's a friend of Pete Dorn, who's a friend of the council and city, longtime attorney, he's had a personal conversation with, they don't even care about the night. They only care to have it running during the day. So, you know, that's really kind of a moot point, in my opinion. So I had the honor to talk to another commissioner today. So actually, I have 4 people who are in support of no longer really needing to do the bell or happy to comply with the city ordinance, which is just nice and smooth, 10 at night to 7 in the morning. So, you know, I hope to talk to a couple more people yet on the our county board and just get their opinions, particularly Christine, who's our chairman, and also our district's rep. So that's all I wanted to comment. Does anyone have any questions for me?
No, thank you, Doctor. Anyone else?
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
All right, I don't see anyone else. So at this time, we have a presentation regarding IT by Trivalent. Mr. Weber.
Thank you, Christine. I suppose the protocol is to stay up, remain here, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Just checking because I like to move around and get a little antsy now and then.
The reason for that, Mr. Weber, is there's a microphone there, and in order for people at home to hear you, you have to be speaking in front of the microphone.
We want everybody to hear me. So first of all, I want to say thank you to the Board of Commissioners, Tom and Jennifer as administrators, Don Sheehan, the IT director, in this process of conducting a county IT assessment and executive assessment. We appreciate the cooperation of all those people mentioned, and again, this opportunity to deliver this report and our findings to the Grand Traverse County Board of Commissioners. What the first thing that I do want to address, probably This is connected to the presentation. Probably some of you have seen the information that came out on the ticker yesterday. Has anybody had a chance to read that or maybe been aware of it? You know, it's funny because of the fact that it's the classic, all right, something's been put out there and the public has it, and somebody grabs a hold of that and writes a story about it. All very factual. The information in here has been pulled and gleaned from our assessment that all of you have. But there is another side of the story too, in that we conduct these assessments, and we've probably done, Tina can attest to this because she's been with Trivalent much longer than I have. We've probably conducted over 1,000 of these in our history of our company. We've done a lot of them. And there's not one organization that has not come up short in evaluating their assessment, their current IT infrastructure, and how that compares to best practices. Are there vulnerabilities? There are vulnerabilities. Are there things that need to be shored up? Absolutely. But it really is not a whole lot different than a lot of other organizations that we come into and what we're brought into. So, although people like to react to things quickly based on what they see and what they read, I just want to make certain, or that you folks know that we have seen this. We agree with it, but there's also a whole nother side of the story. And I think you'll find that the county has done a pretty good job from an IT perspective based on the resources that are available to them.
Right, and there's really been no clear direction.
Yep.
I mean, you know.
No, there has
The
not.
poor IT department's kind of been piecemealing as they can, so there's been, I mean, as we'll get into this, but there's been no real direction.
And
on where
Mr.
to
Weber,
go.
government, as you know, moves at glacial speed. We don't react to anything very quickly.
Right. So, you know, and that's the opportunity. What we're here to show you is that this is all good because there's revelations of showing and demonstrating to not only the board and the administrators, but also to the county constituents. Yeah, I'm a resident here in Grand Traverse County. This is good stuff. And what it is, it's an opportunity for the county and the board to understand where things are at from an IT perspective and what areas can be improved upon. And some things are glaring and some things are not so glaring. But again, it's not that unusual. And I just want to stress that. But I want to talk a little bit, with that said, about the article here. I want to get into a little bit about, you know, Trivalent as a company, what we do, why we were brought in, so that you understand what our strategy was. And then I'm going to turn it over to Tina, who's was very closely and intimately involved with the process, talking to stakeholders, talking to the defined survey groups that were identified, and really walk you through the process as far as how we put this report together. Trivalent's been around. Our roots go actually back to the early 1970s. We've always been involved in IT. If you want to call it IT back then, it was typewriters and fax machines and that type of thing. And we've grown organically over the years. We are considered one of the leaders from an IT managed services company in West Michigan. We're based in Granville. We have offices in Mount Pleasant, Kalamazoo. We just acquired an organization in East Lansing, and Traverse City is a marketplace that we're really focused on. I represent our Northern Michigan effort, and we will have resources up here as well. With that said, just kind of an outline of what we do. Again, we're a managed services provider. We specialize in IT services, professional services, so we can also provide labor where that's needed on a contractual or time and material basis. And with some organizations, they don't have the staffing, they don't have the necessary means to provide IT services. In smaller organizations, they outsource those services to us, and we represent their IT organization. Larger organizations, they use us for bits and pieces of that. So I want you to have that understanding about what we do, and it's specifically information technology. and the support of those services. Okay. We were selected, we were asked by Tom and Jennifer to respond to put a proposal together to do an executive IT assessment. It's right in our wheelhouse. These are things that we do. Again, we've done a lot of them over the years in both the private and public sector. So we're very experienced in this process. It's a big part of the business and what we do. So I want to assure you that we do have that experience. You know, what's in it for us? Tom and Jennifer were very clear right from the get-go. All that we wanted to do was establish our benchmarks where we're at, assess the IT operations, and tell us, in our professional opinion, where are the things that we're doing well, what are the things that maybe we can improve upon. And that's what encompasses an executive GPS or an executive IT assessment. So what does that assessment actually consist of? You know, the purpose, again, and I touched on this just briefly, we work with, our partners are Dell Computers. We sell a lot of Dell equipment, HP, Hewlett-Packard. Those are companies that we represent. And all of them have established benchmarks as to where you ought to be based on the services and the products that they provide. We refer to that as best IT practices. There's Gardner Group is an IT consulting company, a world-renowned IT company. They establish best practices. So these best practices are not best practices that Trivalent establishes. It's the best practices that the industry have established. So those best practices are the benchmark that we measure everything against. So when we come in and we're brought in to do an assessment, we take a look at what your current environment is, and we match that up and we define what those gaps are between where you're at in comparison to what are the suggested IT best practices. In some situations, those gaps are real big. Sometimes they're small. But again, most organizations, if not all, are not 100% up to best IT practices. So I want to point that out again. We accomplish this and come to these conclusions and these measurements in a couple ways. We do a technical assessment. So we brought in an engineer that was on-prem. Don helped in assisting in that. That engineer installs software that we call RapidFire. And what that does, it goes out to all of the endpoints, all the desktop computers that the county supports, anything that's online, printers, desktops, your servers, anything that has to do with the computer operations and the IT infrastructure.
Mr. Weber, does that include the city as well?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yep. We went to all those endpoints, and what that comes back and tells us is what's the software that's on that machine? Is it current? How old is it? How old is that machine? And that provides the data for part of putting this report together that you now have. In addition to that technical assessment, there's an executive assessment. Tom and Jennifer identified for us stakeholders within the county and the city, people that obviously have an influence and have a say as to the operation of the, both the city and the county operations. We set up surveys, electronic surveys to those groups. Tina conducted focus group interviews. There's email correspondence that's going on. There's phone conversations. And in all of those efforts, the intent is to get the feedback from the people out there that are utilizing the IT services that the county provides. So we're getting a basis for, you know, how people feel. What are the shortcomings? What's their frustrations? What do they like? What's going on that's good? So we need to understand all of that and get that gauge. And that, again, the results of that are included in this report. Any questions on so far? Making sense? Good. So who was involved? Obviously, we talked about Tom and Jennifer's involvement. They were essentially what we would refer to as the sponsors. They were the ones that...
I do have a question,
Sure.
Mr. Weber. I represent the west side of Traverse City, and I am in the building on a frequent basis. And employees talk to me, and no one complains about the service that they receive. What they complain about is the fact that the software that they would like to run on our system can't be supported by the antiquated system that we have. Did you differentiate between the two? Frustration with, and this was, by the way, discussed at a city commission meeting, where there was an expressed frustration with the fact that our system, which we share with the city, does not support many of the current softwares that are being utilized to improve productivity in government.
Right. I would agree with that. That was brought out and that was differentiated. I'm sorry, yeah. Yeah, Tina's going to address that. I'm
Okay.
going to cover about the first 7 to 10 slides here, and then she's going to cover because she was intimately involved with those discussions. You know, she's the one that experienced what the temperature gauge was out there. And that, what you said, Christine, is you're spot on. That was voiced. We heard that loud and clear. So Tom and Jennifer involved from a Trivalent Group perspective. I obviously am an account manager. Rob Stout was one of the other account managers. He would have been here, but he just got back from a trip from Singapore, a family trip. So he just got in this morning and experienced some pretty severe jet lag. Our project manager, Scott Whitman, he is basically organized the meetings, the surveys, put the original documentation together as a result of our assessments, both from a technical and from a personnel perspective. And then, of course, Tina McConnell right here, who provided the executive oversight. Tina, it's important to note, and I suggested that we put this in here because when we're doing this type of an assessment for a municipality or a local government, she has that experience. She's worked in IT environments both on the public and private sector. She's a valuable resource for Trivalent when it comes to these types of things because she's been involved in those organizations. She's run those organizations. So she's got a perspective in those organizations that we felt fit very well for what we were trying to accomplish here for the county. So I wanted to point that, her background out. I don't know if you wanted to speak anything more to that, but
No.
My point is that she was very qualified to be involved here. What are the things that we try to get out of these assessments, and what do we need to know? From a strategic planning standpoint, the feedback from the surveys, the people that we talk to, what are their greatest concerns out there? What are those perceptions out there? And you voiced some, Christine, based on your comment just a couple minutes ago. What's the gauge on how proactive is the IT department out there? And quite honestly, there were some pretty positive comments about that. And I think Don's staff they're good at what they do. And the report shows that. How does technology contribute to the business plan? Well, and that's kind of, what is the business plan out there? Is there a strategic plan, and how do they all play together? And Christine and Dr. Bob, you had mentioned, there is no plan out there, and we see those things occasionally when we're working with companies, so and local government institutions. So it's not uncommon. What is the greatest? We were talking with these stakeholders, and many of them were department heads, and it was good to talk to them because they were very good at conveying to us what the disconnect, how do they see IT involvement in their department's success. You have to understand that IT is unique because in any organization, whether it's public or private, the one organization that overlays all departments in an organization is IT. They touch everybody. They have to. And that's what's unique. You can't say that about every department, but IT touches every organization out there. From a budgeting standpoint, how are IT decisions made? How do you derive at determining what the expenditure is out there? Getting feedback from that perspective.
Mr. Weber, did you differentiate between satisfaction between different systems? And I'm going to give you a specific example, and Don Sheehan knows this. I have not ever heard the Sheriff's Department say a single good word about New World software. Not one. Now, I'm differentiating between the software and the system versus the service. Because quite honestly, I've never heard him complain about the service, just the software.
Well,
Now, the prosecuting attorney's office went out because they got tired of standing in court saying the wheel is spinning, Your Honor, and they went out and did, our prosecutor, Mr. Cooney, did about a 1.5 year study to find software that would work for his department. And honestly, you've got the prosecutor using this software over here, the sheriff complaining about New World over here. We have the finance system using an AS400 system that was introduced by IBM June 21st of 1988, and might be, I don't necessarily know, I want to celebrate its 30th anniversary with us. I just as soon, call it a day, but because I've seen other software programs that are better. But my question again is, did you find that some departments were very, very happy with the software that they were using versus other departments that were just totally unhappy?
yep, we saw that. Tina's going to speak to that as well. There were some folks that unloaded on her, and one of the comments was, gosh, I feel like I've had a therapy session, just to get things off of his chest. But we did find that. It's consistent with what we've seen out and what we were told out there. But that's a derivative, again, back to Dr. Bob's comment. You got to have strategy. That's got to be defined. So if you've got people out there doing their own thing, that's a problem. And that has to be...
So what I'm taking from what you're saying is it's extremely important. Our number one goal as a board should be to ask for a long-term strategy. Is that what I'm hearing from you?
That is one of the recommendations that we will...
All right. I will stop interrupting and let you
No,
continue.
that's all right. That's fine. You're making my job actually quite easy because you're just
Not
paving the
everyone
way
says
there,
that,
so
but thank you.
That's all right. Tom and Jen had asked us, and really, they weren't involved with us. The day that Tina was here, Jen purposely said, look, I don't want to have influence. I don't even want to see you. Just do what you were hired to do. We're away from this. And but the question has come up, are we properly staffed? The support, the IT support for a large county and on top of the city, it is a challenge. There's a lot to do every day. And if you don't have that proper strategy, you're going to be just reactive to everything. You're just going to be responding to the fires and to part of that strategy and what we suggest is we want to get every organization to the defined best IT strategies, best practices. Once you get that or get as close to that as possible, that neediness starts to go away. And that's overwritten by an IT strategy umbrella. So once you can get to that best practice environment, your IT is going to be able to operate much more strategically. They're going to be able to, they're not going to have to be so reactive because you're not going to have those problems. You'll still have problems and challenges, but when everybody's out there doing their own thing because they think they got to have it and it's going to be better, that creates its own set of problems. So, is that making sense?
Yes.
Okay.
It is to me. Everyone's
So
nodding.
Excuse me. One of the issues that you'll be talking about is integration. And that's what you're alluding to, is we don't have the integration. We have too many silos. This organization has all kinds of silos throughout.
Yep.
But IT, being it touches all the bases of all the functioning areas, is the one area that can break down the silos through technology and communication. And that requires a long-term strategic plan that is linked in, how you know the various business models in those various departments, how you can consult with them and consult with them on the various software that'll link and connect. Currently, we have one person doing something over here on software, then it moves over to this department, they do the same thing all over again, implementing it, and then they go over to the next one as compared to having it done the first time and all of them talking to each other. They don't have to repeat. And that's what we need to correct, because that is the efficiencies that you're looking for that we currently don't have. We repeat too much and make it too manual.
Right. And I don't want to steal Tina's thunder, but, you know, there are challenges out there and financial challenges that obviously the public is aware of with Grand Traverse County. We all know that. I'm a resident and I know. So what the challenge with this is, you know, what is that silver bullet in all of this? And what, you know, Tom and Jen said, you know, can we look at, you know, how do we save money? And really, when it comes to IT, that's really, really difficult to define that, because when you start to cut and cut and cut, you're going to be more challenged on the things that IT is supposed to do, okay? IT's importance is only going to get greater and greater as time goes on. And if you don't have efficiencies, if you have inefficiencies, that's where you're losing your money, when you're reactive. And your IT organization is just out there doing tasks and putting out fires. That's not very efficient. That's wasting time, that's wasting energy, that all equates to money. So going back, the last portion on this slide is really, you know, what is the proper staffing out there for an organization your size? And that's called out, you know, we tried to touch on those things as well. You know, some of the other items that we wanted to know, you know, what's the makeup of the current IT department? We talked about that already. You know, how is Don's team staffed? What's their expertise? What do they do on a daily basis? What's the current state of the infrastructure out there? We talked a little bit about that as well. What are the current applications? Both Tom and Christine touched on that. What are the applications that are out there? And again, how well do they integrate with the systems that you have in place? Well, we found that there are some challenges there. And again, a lot of that has to do with what, in our professional opinion, is lack of IT strategy and having disparate systems out there and organizations going out and kind of doing their own thing because they felt they needed to do that. That has to be corralled, that has to be fenced in and brought in, and that has to be, you have to control that. You know, the critical success factors, again, in Tina's process, where she actually was sitting down, doing the interviews, talking with the people, you know, what matters to a specific department head or any of these individuals that we spoke to? What was important to them, and how would they define what makes IT, you know, support successful? And then we were trying to find out what were the big issues out there. What's the biggest issues in your department? How does IT affect that? Again, to get a handle on what's the gauge out there, what's happening. So we have to get a pulse on it, and that's part of that process. So in all of this and going through this process, what does the county come back with? Now you have in your hands, you have a document that outlines the current state of your IT infrastructure, how that pairs up to best IT practices and what those gaps are, and then we take those gaps and we assign importance to those gaps. We recommend, you know, things that really need to be addressed probably sooner than later. We like to try to put that into like the 30 or 60-day arena as far as when you really ought to consider doing this. Now, I know for local governments that's a challenge because you define your budgets and then you move on and you only have so much money to spend. But this is a guide that hopefully, at the end of the day, helps design that IT strategy. So we put these recommendations, what are the critical issues, we make the recommendations of what the fixes are to those issues, and then we categorize that critical. Is it a moderate issue? Is it something that can be pushed off and maybe something that's not that important? it's something that you're going to have to deal with, but it's not that impacting. So that report shows that. And again, you know, this is all derived by talking to people and users in all those 28 departments, including the departments from the city. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of information. I think I'm going to turn it over to you now, right? Tina McConnell.
And I want to remind everybody, again, that this is a snapshot in time. So I know that Don has a list of things that are already in progress. And so just I want to make sure everyone understands that this is a snapshot in time. It's what is today, not what's in progress and what will be. And I want to credit Don and his team for the work that they are doing and the infrastructure that they are supporting, because as Tim alluded to, it's a really difficult job. So I had the pleasure of meeting with many of the county and city department directors as my portion of the assessment. And it's an interesting, it's always interesting to observe how the respondents approach that invitation. So on the surveys that were sent out as part of our typical survey, the users were asked if they had an opportunity to talk to someone from Trivalent Group to provide more information, would they like to do that? So those yes respondents were extended an invitation to meet with me in a focus group session, and there were 4 invitations offered. And the feedback ranged from, yes, I'd love to, here's when I'm going to come, to, gosh, I'm really uncomfortable in a group. Can we meet individually? The answer was absolutely. Some of those we did on the phone. Some of those we did face-to-face. And I had a certain respondent say that he was really quite offended by the invitation to meet in a group, and so I offered to meet him individually, and he said, you know what, I'll try the group thing, and if I don't feel like I got through what I needed to say, or I'm uncomfortable with the other people in the room, then I'll meet with you individually, which was a perfect response to that, right? So, indeed, after about 2 hours of talking nonstop, he sat back and folded his hands and said, I feel like I've just had a counseling session with you. How did you make me talk for 2 hours? So I think it's fun for me to be able to get people talking about what they're passionate about. And it's clear that there is a lot of passion about how things are working, both negatively and positively in terms of IT. So in the introduction to our report, I've stated that if you just read the recommendations, the critical recommendations that are in that report about the actual technical stuff, you're going to want to say to yourself, what in the heck is the IT department doing? But what they're doing is supporting their departments, and they're supporting a dizzying list of applications, and they're doing it really, really well, at least in terms of the people who responded to our survey and who sat down with me to talk about that. So that's a little bit more about what I'm going to talk about, is some of the details, and then I want to answer the questions that Tim deferred to me for answering. And throughout the report, you're going to see slides where I have page numbers. For instance, the last bullet on this list has page 16. That's in the actual report that has been delivered to Grand Traverse County. So the who. The IT department is made up of a director, a telecommunications coordinator, a server administrator that at the time it was reported to me that it was vacant, but then I heard that it was recently filled with a promotion from within. So I didn't follow up with Don to say, you know, one of those other numbers is obviously off. So 6.8 technicians, 2.3 programmers, and a 0.25 electrician was reported, but my assumption is one of those is now -1 because was moved into a server administrator. So it's not as important to know if those numbers are actually accurate by line. What's really important to understand is there are basically 11 people supporting an awful lot, like I said, a dizzying list of applications. What does that mean? So they are supporting 17 county locations covering 712 devices, 9 city locations covering 158 devices, Antrim and Leelanau counties with 51 devices, 7 physical servers, 64 virtual servers, 125-ish applications. I didn't count the list, but Don had a very well-organized list that he provided. And then phones, 614 standard phones, 69 voicemail boxes only, 79 outside phone lines, and 219 cell phones. That is a lot of devices and users to support. So let me give you some basic math. At Trivalent Group, one of the services we provide is a service desk. How do we know how many people to put on our service desk? We calculate a forecast of about a half a ticket per user per month. So if we just do the math for Don and his team, they're supporting 2,098 devices. Half a ticket a month per user brings them to 1,049 issues to address every month. That's 95 tickets per week, requiring his 11 staff to close 2.5 tickets an hour. Have you ever been on the phone with tech support anywhere? Verizon, Sprint, Comcast?
Takes 2.5 minutes to get to somebody.
Exactly, on that one issue. So this staff is expected to close, if we just look at it from a mathematical standpoint, 2.5 tickets an hour. That's just break fix. So what you'll see in the report and what you'll hear me say is the biggest criticism of the IT staff is that they're not proactive enough and they're not strategic enough. I'm not sure when they can be proactive or strategic when they're that reactive. So the 2.5 tickets per hour is just break fix. It's not strategy, it's not looking forward, it's not making recommendations, and it's not getting the flu. Don probably cries when somebody calls in with the flu, because then somebody else has to pick up that load. So they're probably behind, and probably not everyone reports that they're getting exactly what they need when they need it, because there isn't enough bodies to go around.
I don't believe we track all those numbers, do we, that closely?
You might not. I'm using the math that we use in helping you see
I don't
that.
believe we track it that closely, and you can't manage effectively what you can't measure.
One of the
So you
reasons
need
why,
measurements.
yeah, that's true. And one of the things that I heard was there is a ticketing system in place that not everybody has adopted. So that's one of my recommendations, is that if we want to make technology more efficient and we want to get those numbers so they are measurable, is we have to have the
Did
users
you ask why
using the ticketing system.
it hasn't been adopted by everyone?
Well, it's just really easy to grab that IT person that's sitting right there or walking down the hallway. And this is common everywhere. This is common everywhere. That the IT person is walking past the door. So you go, oh, I'm having a problem with my computer. So you run out and you say, can you just help me for 5 minutes? That's way easier than putting in a ticket, right? But it's not quantifiable.
No.
So that's one of the recommendations that we have is to enforce the adoption of the ticketing system. So as a result of the
It's
volume.
outside, I've used outside contractors in different organizations, and it's all based on tickets, and then
Correct.
the outside is easier. You get familiar with people, you want to help them and be nice to them. Quite frankly, I pulled them in a couple of times myself at times when I got stuck on stuff. You know, I just didn't think of it, you know. I will now.
Yeah, it's very common.
But I think we're all not intentionally at fault, but we're
Right.
at fault. But I think the department needs to put that in as a policy, is we don't do it unless
I will admit to failing in that regard as well, because I walk into Don's office and I go right in to look for Don and go, I can't get the such and such on my iPad. And he says, give it to so-and-so, and I do, but I'm equally as guilty. But I see that there is a better way.
Right,
Yeah.
right, absolutely,
And we have to model the right kind of behaviors for people.
absolutely. And there was a lot of acknowledgement in the directors that I spoke with that said, yeah,
And you didn't need to nod so vigorously, Don. He's over there going, yes, she does.
And they say, yeah, we know we're supposed to, but you know, so-and-so is so nice, and they're right there, and they understand my problem, and I know they can fix it faster than I can put the ticket in. But again, it's not measurable, right?
Right.
So that's why I just bring in the math that we use at Trivalent Group, is we look at a half a ticket per user or device per month. And so given the math, there's a pretty big volume for the current IT
Is that
staff.
a standard
to have to address.
calculation across the industry, or?
It's a standard calculation across the national group that we belong to. So we have the opportunity to belong to a measurement group called the True Profits Group. And we meet nationally with other managed service providers that are just like us, but in places that we don't compete with. And we actually lay out our financials, we lay out our biggest challenges, we use them for recommendations, and that's a number that we've all adopted in our TPG group, is a half a ticket per user or device per month.
Does that number change if you have newer systems, if you don't have all these legacy systems
Absolutely.
like we have? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So a very typical way for us to bring on a new company, so we work in the small business market, right? So let's say a doctor's office wants us to take over management of their IT system. So it is not unusual for us to do an assessment like this. We do that up front so that we know what we're going to deal with when we walk in the door, right? And as Tim said, we always find something wrong, because how can you keep everything up? I mean, if you walk into my house today, you're going to see, outdated wallpaper, because I don't keep everything up all the time, right? So same is true for IT. I just lost my train of thought. What was I talking about? Oh, so we go in somewhere and we do an assessment of the environment so we can make the recommendations to bring your things up to date that you can. Okay, you need to have a new firewall, your server is on an old operating system, we want to update that and make sure that you have appropriate workstation operating systems. And at that point then, we put them on a maintenance contract. We bring them up to date, put them on a maintenance contract. The typical honeymoon period is about 6 months, and we do everything in tickets. So we measure in the ticketing system, our 6-month ticket volume is fairly high at the beginning, but then ultimately it falls off because we've addressed that software issue, or we've taught that user how to do something they need to do, or we fix their email on their phone, or whatever that case may be. So it is very common for that ticket volume to fall off once systems are updated and once users become trained or accustomed to what they need to be doing.
So, let me understand. If the county and the city upgraded their system, and we had a long-term strategy, and we coordinated so everybody was pretty much going in the same direction, what you're saying, what I'm hearing you say, is the service, the reactive service level would go down.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay, my job's done. I'm done now.
For
Yes, that's exactly.
a period, though, as Don will tell you, I mean, the speed
Well,
at
then
which
stuff
things are
starts
changing in
aging,
IT is amazing.
right.
And you
Stuff
have to have
starts
that
changing.
strategy.
Correct.
Moving forward to say, we want to continually update here and there. And
Correct.
because if you update it once and do like happening now, in 5 years, you're in the same boat.
Absolutely.
Well, what we've got is Department A doing this, Department B doing this, Department C doing this, and nothing is integrated, and
That
we have
exacerbates
11
the
people
problem.
going around the county putting out fires, and nobody's measuring how bad the fires are or how often they occur and on what software. That's what I'm hearing, because I'm guilty. I don't go in and fill out a
Open a
ticket.
ticket.
No one's asked me to. I certainly would and will from now on.
Thank you.
So that's what I'm hearing.
I
Yes.
think what you'll find as you get into this is that there are policies that don't cost us money but could be put in place to change behaviors, which will deal with some of that in terms of best practices.
Correct.
And we haven't done that either. So that is
correct.
one of the things that we can do coming out of that. That won't be expensive, but will lay the foundation for the kind of practices that we need. And then we can build on those with technology when we can afford to do it.
And this is equally important for the city to do
Correct.
tickets as well as the county.
Right.
Right.
So we can appropriately assess what the city's needs are on the systems we share with them.
Right, absolutely. And to address what Dr. Bob said, Microsoft, so two things, hardware and software, right? So we generally suggest a budget of device replacement every 5 years. So your laptops are probably going to last 5 years. However, Microsoft has announced that it is going to change its operating system every 18 months. Now, it hasn't done that quite that aggressively, But you have probably experienced that you can only get through a couple of revisions of a Microsoft operating system before you have no choice but to update,
I'm clinging
The
to
workstation.
Windows 7, thank you.
as am I. But ultimately, we won't get the support we need because Microsoft will stop providing security updates for Windows 7. And if you don't upgrade,
Windows 7 altogether.
Then
Oh,
you
it's the
become
best
vulnerable.
one out of all the Windows.
Windows 10's
It
not
doesn't
bad.
even-
No,
Uh,
I just wanted to reinforce, we're kind of past it, but, you know, we've already talked, it's strategy. You know, what Tom said, it's policy. You can develop all the strategy you want, and you can come up with all the policies. Then the most important aspect of that is, it's got to be enforced.
Yes, it does.
The leaders have to enforce it, and that's
And-
how you run a business. It's no different than, you know, a municipality should, from that regard, should be.
Absolutely, no, it absolutely does need to be
And
enforced.
It has to start,
Yes.
it has to start with the board members, it has to start with the county leaders, and that's where the enforcement comes.
Okay.
Well, we're pretty notorious from my assessment, having been here, 4 or 5 months now. We give people a lot of responsibility but no authority. And that's not fair, and you don't get anything done, you know. You have to give them the authority to implement it along. If you're giving them responsibility, they have to have the authority behind it. And we don't do that in a lot of areas that I'm finding. This is just one example.
and you're not
of that.
alone. You're
Yeah.
not alone.
Well,
So,
I don't
We're
care about-
changing.
I don't care about being alone. I want to do it the right way.
Right.
You know, in fact, I
agree.
would like this organization to be a model for others as to how to do it the right way.
that'd be great.
That's where we need to go.
Absolutely, absolutely. So is the back-end technology out of date? Yes, some of it is. Some of it is in the process of being upgraded. Some of it's out of date for a very good reason. Yes, I'm going to get to the AS400 in a minute, I promise. But the IT staff appear to be heavily engaged in departmental support, which usually means application support because of the way it's currently structured. Every department has their own application. Now, I'm using that in a generality, but that's what I'm hearing. And therefore, they are unable to attend to what we call the care and feeding or the care and maintenance of the underlying infrastructure or to focus on business advancements. Now, some of the IT staff were called out as being extremely helpful in recommending equipment, recommending whether or not to upgrade an application, those sorts of things. So very much of satisfaction of IT or dissatisfaction with IT is really, what that really meant was, I'm really happy with this person that I deal with all the time, or I'm really unhappy with this one person that I deal with all the time. And I assure you that this person who's really unhappy with this person, the next director said, oh, I love that IT person, and this is the person I depend on all the time. So we have to be careful that we're not generalizing what we hear about IT from one person about IT in general, because it could be that they're just irritated with that application or they're irritated with that person. We don't want to apply those principles to the entire department or to IT as a whole. So I'm really careful when I do my interviews to make sure that I weed that out. And it was very apparent that the IT staff is receiving very high marks for the work that they're doing almost across the board. Not everybody is 100% thrilled, as you know, but it's a big system.
I think
It's a big,
I've
complex
tried to
system.
be very, very clear to differentiate the frustration level to the antiquated system versus the service that the department provides.
Exactly, yep, and that's a great reinforcement, because that's exactly what I heard as well. So when I asked about critical success factors, and I just summarized for you those things that were repeated, Don is very respected and perceived as highly responsive. The IT staff members are viewed as vital to the success of their departments, the departments that they serve. The department heads just don't know what they would do without them. And the IT stakeholders are committed to maintaining a county IT department and a local perspective. A local presence. So I made it very clear from the first minute I sat down with someone that Trivalent was not here to replace the IT staff, because that was a big hurdle for people to get over when they started talking to us. If you are invested in that IT staff member who works with you and you're invested in your application, the last thing you want is somebody from Granville coming in to take that over, and you're going to have to be on the phone with them all the time and not having someone in person. So that came through very clear, that the stakeholders that we interviewed are committed to maintaining the county IT department and the local presence of IT. it also became very apparent, as we've already talked about, that IT needs to be viewed as the foundation upon which the business of the county, and by relationship the city, really functions and is conducted. It's not a standalone department that you can look at as its own silo, because the last department that can be a silo is IT. What is missing is someone who can serve in that strategic management capacity that doesn't have the distraction of the day-to-day reactive work. So about the time Don probably thinks he's going to sit down and work on a strategic plan, he's got 15 minutes, because then he's got to go do something else. And it's very hard to get your mind wrapped around that sort of thing. I sometimes have to shut my office door and put a note on it and says, I have to work on this for 2 hours straight. Interrupt me if you absolutely have to, but if you don't have to interrupt me this moment, please don't, so I can get this done. But I did that today. I did. So in the next few slides, I'm going to share with you the details of the report. Because this is both a technical and an executive assessment, I anticipate that you're not going to understand all the technical stuff. You don't have to, okay? Don and his team understands the technical stuff. But what's really important for you to understand is, yes, there is some urgency to address some of the needs identified in the assessment. And what you can do today as a board is to clarify the vision, establish the priorities, and support the accountability for the processes and the standards that are in place and need to be put into place. And, you know, like you said, lead by example, right? So the critical concerns really focused on aging infrastructure. Aging devices pose security risks, and the best analogy I could think of is you drive a brand new vehicle off the lot, you expect that it's going to, everything's perfect, right? Everything's new, it's bright and shiny and clean, and what could possibly go wrong? And a month later, you get a recall postcard in the mail.
Tree stump.
And you have to take it to the dealership to get it fixed for free, but there was obviously something wrong with it when you bought it, right? So that's the same thing that happens with IT. Vendors, Microsoft, HP, like Tim mentioned, Dell, those that we work with, they release things that aren't perfect. And then they release updates, and they release, sometimes the updates they release do more harm than good. And the cycle just goes on. That's never going to go away. So the fact that these are critical concerns is accurate. The fact that they can be fairly easily addressed, they're very tactical things, is also accurate. But addressing these things does cost money, and that's where a strategy to that spending and a strategy to the budget comes in. And really, everything on this page is sort of related. If you have a certain level of device and workstations and operating systems and what some vendors call firmware, then you can't just rip one out and put a brand new one in without understanding the implications of the other things that it's connected to and plugged into, right? And we call those configurations. So when your computer talks to the wireless system, which talks to a server somewhere, which then lets you go to the internet, you have to make sure that all those pieces connect. And you can't always just rip one out and replace one without the consideration of what the other ones are. Looks like you have a question.
Well, I'm hearing you say the word server over and over again. And, you know, I've been to a couple of NACO conferences where Oakland County continuously is doing presentations, and Oakland County is known nationally for their IT and their innovation with IT, especially when it comes to county government. And, you know, my experience has been that Grand Traverse County is not using the cloud, perhaps, as much as we could. At least that's, I don't really know. I mean, Don would have to address this more than myself. It's just been my experience that we don't. And we've got server and server and server and server. And I'm thinking to myself, there's got to be a better way.
Not necessarily. The physical infrastructure that you have in place is actually very close to best practice. One of the things that we have talked about has been whether or not it has the right capacity. And again, when it reaches a certain age, then you'll want to talk about, does it make more sense, again, this is strategy, does it make more sense to replace the physical device, or does it make more sense to go whole cloud? Cloud is not necessarily cheaper than the current setup that you have, which is physical devices and virtual devices. The benefit of what you have today with and I don't want to confuse you with the technology, but you have this bubble riding on a piece of hardware, right? That bubble can move back and forth across different pieces of hardware if a piece of hardware fails. You would have the same thing in the cloud, but when you have cloud applications, then you have to have really great internet connectivity everywhere. And I don't know if you have that here. So again, that's a strategic decision that needs to be made to investigate. Right now, there's no investment return on ripping your current infrastructure out and
Well,
going to the cloud.
please understand, I'm not suggesting
Right,
that.
I do, I
I'm
do.
just trying to think
Yep.
down the road on where we're going to go from here. I realize it's not my decision.
Yep, but the cloud means lots of things, so the cloud could mean, I'm guessing that you have some applications across the county now that are accessed via the cloud, which means there isn't any software sitting on a server here in Grand Traverse County. That software is somewhere else, and the way that people get to it is via the internet, right? Cloud could also mean that you have services that are stored with Microsoft, because Microsoft has a cloud, Amazon has a cloud, Trivalent Group has a cloud. So we also do something called co-location. So we house some of our customers' servers in our data center because then we back it up to another data center. So there's a lot of iterations for what that can look like. But really, your current infrastructure of virtual servers sitting on top of physical servers is not out of best practice.
And Tina, I want you to understand, I'm not necessarily looking for cheaper, I'm looking for better.
Right.
I'm looking for value.
Right, absolutely. Yep, I do get that.
Okay.
How many servers do we have? 60?
We had 7 physical and 64 virtual, is that? Okay,
So we're set.
71.
Majority of them are running.
Don,
A single rack.
I'm sorry.
But, I mean, the majority of the servers are in a single rack sitting in the IT computer center. So, yeah, there's 5-6 pieces of hardware that are running 60 servers.
And the life cycle, 3 to 5 years?
Yes.
And what's the average life cycle of the ones we currently have?
Well, we're about 3.5 years in right now.
And
So-
is there a plan for replacement of those in place? Or is it moving to the cloud, or is there any plan at all in terms of options moving forward in that regard?
We have not really looked at it at this point, but we would have to make that decision really next year is when we'd have to start saying, where are we going with that?
Right.
And
And
odds
is-
are, some of it would still stay here, even if you move some of it to the cloud. You'd probably not be able to move 100%.
Yeah.
And the cloud brings a lot of other issues with it too, because you lose that control then, don't you? Where you're using another vendor for the cloud, basically?
Sometimes,
So if if they have issues,
right,
which I've seen recently where my wife used to work with an insurance company, and the cloud that they used was down for a day.
right.
And
you
there was
don't have
nothing
any-
they could do.
Right.
Because there was no other redundancy available for them.
Right.
So it
Right.
does bring some other issues that, well,
No, I understand, but again, that would be part of,
a
you know,
comprehensive overall
a
plan.
comprehensive overhaul of strategy
Absolutely,
and how you,
yep. And not all of your applications will run in the cloud either, so that's why you'll probably end up with a hybrid environment. I would not be surprised if moving forward, Don says, you know what, we could put some of this in the cloud,
Yeah.
or some of your applications those vendors may update themselves to only run in the cloud, but then you'll have some that are physically stored here as well.
I think there's probably some proprietary information that you might want to keep in-house, but the rest could go to the cloud. But of course, being a FOIA organization, and we have nothing we can keep secret anyway. You know, we have to give everything up being a public entity, but I suppose there are some that we could keep, which the servers would act as the backup for the proprietary, and we could move into the cloud. But we'd have to do a cost analysis to see if it makes sense to do
Exactly.
that.
Exactly.
Cloud gets a lot of attention over the last 5 years, and it continues to get more and more attention because everybody's talking about it, right? There's a lot of factors. There's a lot of factors that go in and a lot of considerations to determine if it's right for any organization. There's cost factors. You know, the thing that I like to say is, do you want to get out of the equipment business? You know, what does that mean to Don's organization? probably going to lighten his load, but then, what are you giving up? It doesn't make sense. Many times it does not make sense to go all in. So it's a difficult question to answer.
But what I'm hearing is now is the time to ask the question and get it answered.
That's
Correct.
why in the beginning.
That's what I'm hearing.
Correct.
That's why I said in the beginning, when this study was conducted, people want to, the first blush is, oh, they want to cut, or they want to spend money, or whatever the situation is.
Not us.
Not you. I'm a resident, what I hear out there, right? So I'm talking it from a Grand Traverse County resident perspective. You know what? This is an opportunity for the county to get better at what they do. Not just IT, but everything, all the services that they provide. And this is a study, this is the beginning of that you have to build off of. Again, ultimately coming to and developing strategy, developing policy, and then enforcing. So, broken record.
And planting money trees, right, as well. So, what was my last thought about? Oh, you saw in my introduction list that one of the roles I play at Trivalent Group is a VCIO. So I'm a virtual CIO I have 8 clients. And what that means is they don't have a CIO of their own, and so I provide them ad hoc executive oversight, and I help them with planning, I help them with budgeting. We usually work on a 3 to 5 year budget together. We talk about replacement strategy. So 7 years ago, I took on a client that has locations in several states. They had their equipment in a data center in Grand Rapids, and the first thing that Brent said to me is, I want to get out of the hardware business, but I have to do it gradually. So the first thing that we're going to do is move our hardware from the data center it's in currently to your data center. So in the first year, we did that. We moved their stuff from the data center they had been in to our data center to provide easier access for us to support that. He said, I don't want my guys touching servers anymore. I want you guys to fix my servers. They were physical. So then this last go-round, last summer, he said, okay, it's time for me to replace those servers, and I'm not going to. I'm going to go completely to Trivalent's cloud. So we had to make sure with him that all the applications could move, all the users could see what they wanted to see, that we could still print where we needed to print, and all that sort of consideration. So it was a very long-term strategy on his part that he had planted that seed with me from the minute we engaged, and we have completed that project with him. One of the options you'll see in my report, and I didn't check with Don to see if it's been explored or not, is Office 365, which is Microsoft's latest way to supply email and the Office package. And that's not a fit for everyone. But again, that's something that you can strategize. Is that something that can help? Does it fit us? There's a checklist. Is it affordable? That sort of thing. And that was one of the last things that I did for this client was he said, okay, and I'm getting out of the Microsoft Office business as far as installing it somewhere. I want to do Office 365, and I need this many people to do this, and this many people to do this, and this many people to do this. So Microsoft has done a nice job with allowing you to pick and choose and mix packages. So that's a little bit later on the end of my report, but. This is much of the same. So again, just practices and policies that need to be put into place, but they need someone to be able to focus on that. Regularly recurring vulnerability scanning, internal and external, antivirus and anti-malware, not running or not installed on some systems. And Don, I've given Don the full report so he knows which one, so the IT staff can go tackle that. I mentioned earlier that oftentimes when vendors release patches, they do more harm than good. So the best practice is to be able to test that patch before you roll it out to all of your systems. It's very time intensive because there are hundreds of patches that are sent out every single day.
Tina, did you find that when you found systems that didn't have current malware or whatever on them, was there any department that regularly checked?
I didn't dig that deep.
Okay.
I didn't dig that deep.
Okay.
No. One of the things that is on this slide that I heard a lot in the interviews was either not enough internet or fear that we didn't have any failover or redundancy in internet. So in some departments, if internet goes down, you're toast. Your wife's insurance company, once the internet went down, because their applications were in the cloud, they were stuck filing all day or going home because they couldn't do any work, right? And so the data that we had collected about the size of, we call it the size of your pipe, was incorrect. You actually have a bigger pipe than what I had assumed. So again, this is news to Don, but he might want to work with the provider to see, okay, why, what's not being delivered, or why are people perceiving that they don't have enough internet when really we do have a lot of internet. So just those kinds of things that need to be dug into a little bit deeper, get some details about the who and the where. And then you have to think about the fact that, is it where it's coming in? Is it within that building? Is it within that person's office? You have to look at all that connectivity and try to figure out where are the problems happening in all of that.
May I?
Go, anytime.
I know there has been a concern about strategic plan for the county and business plan. And I understand how important it would be in the private sector. Product life cycles are 18 months in technology and they change, so it's very different. But in this business, we do the same thing year after year after year after year. So we don't need that strategic plan as an organization. It's good to have one, and I mentioned that when I first got here. And we don't need that business plan because the business that we have doesn't change
Right, you're
much.
not changing your business, right?
So I don't want that to be a hindrance to our not developing a strategic plan for IT that links and connects and develops an IT strategy on hardware policies and interconnectivity.
Absolutely.
So I think we can do that without having that business plan or that strategic plan, which we have one someplace, but it's outdated, So I want to keep that thought in mind as you go through things.
Well, the strategic plan that we do have does focus on our IT and infrastructure.
So yeah, it makes mention of that, but I've heard that, we need to update those. I don't think we need to update them because of the consistency of the model. Being a service-based delivery business, we do this all the time. Mm-hmm. It's just how we do it and how we can do it better, and how the integration and the consulting work of an IT department can make those processes interconnect better and link and more efficient. And
Correct.
That can be a kind of a standalone strategy.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
I just want to get that on the table. I think that's important, so we keep that
Right.
thought in mind.
So
as we go
change
through
comes
this.
from multiple places, right? For a business, they have business drivers of change. I'm going to expand, I'm going to acquire another location, I'm going to open a store in another state.
Yeah.
As a doctor, I'm going to take on another doctor that provides a different set of brings a different set of patients into my building, that sort of thing. You don't have those necessarily at the same rate that they might, but what you're saying is...
The problem is, with same county, complacency can come in.
Mm-hmm.
And there isn't the driving mechanism for change in the competitive marketplace.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why you need the strategy to force that look.
Right.
And that's what we need to do out of this, whatever direction or administratively we decide. We need a strategic plan in IT that links into a number of things. But
Correct.
That's critical, and that's the model.
Right.
We then drill down tactics, action steps, timeframes,
Mm-hmm.
links with departments. It also might, and we may need to help people shift from that role of implementer and fixer to consultant, and that's a
Correct.
different skill set.
Right. But you have those currently now, according to the department directors, so
Yeah.
that's a mix.
I think we've repeatedly included the enhancement of technology in our strategic plan. We've always talked about it very well. Don does his homework, he comes in and he says, I need to upgrade this system or this, that,
Yeah.
that system. Obviously, all of those come with a price tag. And oftentimes those price tags haven't been able to be fulfilled. I think part of our lack of connectivity is, Chris, you made reference earlier to the software that the prosecutor went out and bought. the courts have went out and bought different software. New World was promoted as the savior for all of us as far as law enforcement and jail
And
tracking and all
honestly,
that
at
stuff.
conferences, I hear no one say
And-
anything nice about that.
And since we've purchased it, we've had very little success with it, and I think everyone will agree it's been pretty unsuccessful, and it certainly doesn't provide us the information that it was promoted to be able to do. So that's a problem. But the fact is that, we've identified that we needed to enhance our technology. We've just always been so reactive trying to take care of the technical needs that we had today, that we were not able to plan for our future.
Right.
And not only can we not plan for the future, we have not been able to set aside funding for that future expansion. That's why we have, 3 or 4 different generations of Windows, because we simply, can't figure out a way that we can pay to upgrade the whole system-wide, or upgrade, anytime you upgrade hardware and software, I know in my business, I'm stuck about every 3 years, I have to upgrade the hardware because I can no longer continue to support the software. And it becomes a real problem. But, I have new hardware that I installed went live January 1st with the new Windows 10 and the new QuickBooks programs, but I can't read the files that were in my system in 2001. I can't open that file on this software that's in here. Now, I'm sure that somewhere along the way there's a patch that will allow me to do that.
Actually, I can tell you how to
But the
do it,
fact
but
is,
not
I've got it on a pen drive, and I can access it if I need to somehow. But as of right now, I don't have to go back and look at projects that I did in 2001.
That's good.
But the fact is that, the upgrade of the hardware, the upgrade of the software, you have to plan for that, but you also, when you do that, you give away some of that history because it becomes inaccessible to you. And that's a problem also.
And it's a self-fulfilling vulnerability. We have many manufacturing clients who run Windows XP on their floor. The computers that are on the plant floor are running Windows XP because that is the operating system that machine that the machinist is working on is compatible with. They can't upgrade, so they're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place to continue to do the business the way they do it.
But the risk building on Sonny's comments is, without the strategic plan broken down into hardware acquisitions, you do exactly what has been done here.
Correct.
Is you buy the software package hoping it solves one problem without looking at it in totality and linkage connectivity and those kinds of issues. And that's when you make more mistakes as compared to doing it the other way. And so that's what we have to move in terms of behaviors.
Right.
Is that
Yes.
is that planning portion.
Yes.
And we look at something at a certain department, like in the courts needs, well, how does that link and connect? If it doesn't, maybe it's not the thing to use, and maybe there's another option, And of course, I think, as we mentioned, we've gone back, or we're still using a foundation that's in 1988, and that hinders our ability to do some of the things we should do as well. But they are all very expensive solutions.
They are. One of the things I wanted to point out was I wrote geographically appropriate backup routine, or thinking, what in the heck does that mean? So in the industry, generally we recommend that the backup data is at least 50 miles away from your current data, and at this time, that is not your situation. So we would encourage you to look at additional, we call it a two-step versus the one-step, or moving the actual targets, but that's can be an astronomical.
Why 50 miles?
Well, we always talk about it in terms of the smoking hole. If it's a crater, like if your building is a crater, then 50 miles away is probably a safe distance for your backup data to be, so you could ship servers somewhere and bring your data back up. And
Okay, so are you saying that this is why a cloud might be beneficial?
It doesn't have to be a cloud, but a cloud can benefit in that way, yes.
Okay.
Or you can just have it targeted somewhere, another physical target somewhere as well. So
Okay.
either one is an
The
option.
cloud's become a really big thing to talk about but I know when I looked at it for my system, it made no sense. It made no sense financially, and because, at least in my operation, I have issues with my internet. So, you know, if all of a sudden my internet's down for
Right.
20 minutes or an hour
Can't
and a
work.
half or a day and a half, I can't create an invoice, I can't receive a payment, I can't do anything, and that's not acceptable. So, you know, to go to a cloud-based system, it made no sense to me whatsoever. Now, you know, obviously, I back up and, you know, on the pen drives, and there's drives that stay at the shop, and the hard drives are at the shop, and there's another one that goes with me every night. You know, that's
Yeah.
the way I do it.
That's another way to do it, yep. Sometimes,
Not best practice.
no, it's not best
Probably not.
practices. But we have a client who's doing that as well. They're pulling a tape out, backup tape, and driving it somewhere and putting it in a safe deposit box, or taking it home. So there's lots of ways to skin that cat, but not all of them are best
I
practice.
wouldn't, I don't anticipate that we'll be doing that.
No, it doesn't make sense for the volume that we have at the county, but.
Right.
But the point is, clouds are really popular to talk about in today's world, but I'm not sure they're the answer for everybody either.
Well, I think it's not a sole answer, but I think that you have to look at a blend.
Yeah, we call it a
That's what I'm
hybrid.
seeing at conferences when I go.
Right, we call that a hybrid.
Yeah.
Yep, absolutely.
My problem is I don't have enough understanding of the cloud technology and applications to make good decisions. And that's why I have people, downs of the world around.
Right,
But what I do ask is you ask those questions and explore.
correct,
That's the key.
correct,
And then educate me.
right. Absolutely. Change control policy came up in much of our conversations, and there was a phone system upgrade that was recently done wherein a change control policy was created and a communication policy. And again, that's just like Don said, I'm sorry, like Tom said, those are things that can be put into place that don't cost a lot of money, but then it's adhering to those practices and making sure that everybody involved in the change process adheres to that practice of announcing it, vetting it with stakeholders, communicating it, rolling it out. I think there's a new password policy in place that I heard about during my interviews. And if there is a new one in place, you may have heard that people hate it. You know what? I hate ours. If there's a password policy in place that's doing its job, the people will hate it because it requires people like me who can't remember a thought from here to that door to have to change my password and remember it.
Yes.
And it's hard. It's hard work. But
My new QuickBooks program requires me to change
And your
my
password is?
every 90 days.
yes, that's what ours
Every
is
90
too.
days, I have to change the password.
I think ours is 90 now.
Think
Sounds like you
about-
love it.
Think about that, you know, it's,
Yeah, it's hard, but if the password, if you've heard people say they hate the password policy, then it's.
it works.
Then Don's doing it right.
Okay.
It's doing its job.
All right.
So,
And you heard that they hate it.
I glued all 3 computers in the morning.
No, I don't think I heard that they hate it. I think I heard that there was a new one in place or something. I don't remember
Yeah,
what I
that's
heard,
true.
but led me to
Yeah.
believe there was a new one in place, so. I also wanted to talk about business continuity and disaster recovery planning, which kind of goes back to the same smoking hole crater thing. But I wanted to emphasize that this is not just about IT. So this is something for you to think about as a county, think about broad ranging. So let's say that the FBI comes in at midnight tonight and bars the county doors. Okay, everybody shows up for work tomorrow morning. What are they going to do? They can't get in? How are you going to communicate that to the public? What are you going to have the workers do? Are they going to go home? Are they going to go to a different building? Are you going to have phones available that you can, the red phone, you can have bat phones somewhere that you can call people and let them know? Do you have a phone tree set up? How are people going to get paid? If you have hourly workers who can't make their house payment unless they get their check on Friday, what's going to happen to those people? How are they going to get paid? So a business continuity and disaster recovery plan involves IT heavily, but should not be led by IT. Please don't put that burden on Don's shoulders. You're welcome. And it involves a much more broad range than just IT. So one of the jobs I've had, and all of these have been under Trivalent Group. My husband likes to tell people I can't keep a job, but I've been drawing a Trivalent paycheck for a long time, but they just keep sending me into places to work full-time. I went to this hospital for 3 months, and I stayed for 2 years. It was a wonderful opportunity for me. And I had firsthand knowledge of what it's like to recover from a disaster, because we had a July storm wherein we had the automatic doors, and the hospital got flooded when the city drains filled, and the landscape rocks were thrown against that door, and once that door opened, it couldn't shut because the rocks were in the way. And so it flooded the entire wing of the hospital where the emergency department was. Hot July summer a few years ago, very high humidity. And so I lived firsthand what it was like to take staff and patients through that kind of a disaster. We had a disaster recovery plan, thank goodness. It was executed very well by the leadership team at the hospital. At the time, it was in a 3-ring binder, literally on a filing cabinet, but there was a same 3-ring binder was in every one of the leadership team's homes. And so it was available, but we had the red phone plan, and we had the communication plan, and we had that plan, and it worked. And the hospital was lauded, written up in the hospital journal and lauded for its response to that disaster. So it works. Nowadays, we don't put them in 3-ring binders anymore and spread them all over the city, but it's really imperative that you have a business continuity and disaster recovery plan for the health and well-being of your staff and your teams.
Do you have one, Don, in conjunction with Greg in emergency services? Have you?
We really didn't have anything planned. We're doing our last thing back up, and help the stores and that back up.
We talk about cold sites and hot sites. So if something happened to one of our customers today, we could probably get them a server delivered in 3 days. Sometimes we can do it overnight. I look at Tim because he's on the sales side and he knows much more about that than I do. But then you have to have the software vendor reinstall the software before the backup data can then be loaded. So you're probably 3 to 5 days from getting servers and applications back up and running. But then if your computers are all locked in that same building, then you have to get workstations. Again, you can probably get them overnighted, but you can only build them just so fast. And so if you kind of think about the magnitude of that, that's what business continuity and disaster recovery planning does for you. It's a big task, but an important task. Okay, biggie issues. So one of the questions I said was, we've talked for 2 or 3 hours, depending on the person I was talking to. If there was only one thing and one thing only that could be solved, what would your pick be? So document management, and I put a separate appendix in the report that once I typed it up, it felt much flatter than the passion that came through in the speaking. And that is on base and everything else that everybody else has already bought. So there's a couple of camps out there in terms of document management. In some cases, on-base works really well. In some cases, it stinks. There's been, I think, 3 iterations of it, and so the vendor's getting better, and the server support is getting better. So those are improvements. But because of its lack of reliability at some stages of its growth, some departments went out and bought their own document management systems. So that has just exacerbated the problem, because now you have multiple document management systems in place in the county. So one of the things we highly recommend, which we've already said, is you got to throttle back that individualized purchasing, because if we didn't go out and buy this other piece of software, would we have had the IT capacity and the financial resources to focus on a strategic purchase and a strategic application support? So that's a biggie that you'll have to dig into. The AS400, another elephant in the room, right? So the AS400 is a very stable infrastructure, and I know firsthand that Oakland County still has AS400 in their infrastructure. So it's old, it's antiquated, if you look at the age of antiquing, but it's stable, and it does so much that, again, that's one of those things, you can't just rip it out and hope the world continues to turn because you did that. You have to look at all the applications that it's serving, all of the functions that it's meeting, and you have to make sure that each of those applications and each of those functional groups is replicated somewhere else or by something else. So again, that's a very strategic decision. Yes, you're going to have to replace it 2018, is that end of life?
for the current model that we're on.
Mm-hmm.
You have to have it built in factory.
Right, right. So will it have to be replaced eventually? Probably, you know, like anything, like
You know,
old cars.
what
you'll-
I'm hearing, Tina, about the AS400, and I hear this from department heads, is that in order to get the kind of information that they want to use to manage their departments more effectively, they need to ask for particular programs, which requires a programmer to write a program for the AS400 system, which costs them money and takes forever. And, you know, there's communication back and forth because, well, that's not quite how I want it.
Right.
This is why I need the information. This is what I'm looking for. It's extraordinarily inefficient for departments in the information age to be able to manage information so that they can be more productive, more responsive to the people they serve, and make it easier for their employees. When, you know, I can't tell you how many times at the Commission on Aging Board we asked for information, and we have been told that would require a program, and all we want to do is to be able to manage our information so that we can direct our services to where they're going to bring the most value to the
Right.
seniors, and you have to write a program for that.
And that's a great segue into how do you have a strategic planning conversation about replacing the AS400 or about getting that data, right? So you ask yourself, okay, what data points do you need? What fields do you need in that program? I need to know what, first name, last name, birth date, I don't know.
But I've been to GFOA conferences, and I've seen software that is much better than the AS400 system.
But may I ask a question regarding Oakland, which is somewhat of a model on how to use IT effectively in the public sector? And they have still use the AS400. So are they transitioning out of it slowly? What role does it play? What are they using? I mean, there has to be some benefit if they're still using it, but obviously it's a very small part of their strategy. And so did they transition over years, or how did they move from A to B to get better?
I don't know the answer to that question, but what I can tell you is, from my experience in other organizations,
Well,
what I've done is site visits. So I have something I know I need to replace, somebody else is using something else that I'm interested in or I've heard is a great model. Can I just go shadow my counterpart there for a day and see and ask those very questions of them? Why are you still using this? What are you using it for? Do you have a transition plan? And you probably have some sort of a county sharing opportunity. So does someone else already have a strategic plan for replacing the AS400 system in their county? And can you borrow it? Can you see it? Can you modify it? I mean, it's public information, and, you know, it's their intellectual property.
Counties really do, at conferences, want to help each other
Right, right.
become more productive.
So find one that's already transitioned out, and maybe that becomes a template for the strategic plan that says, in X number of years, we want to get off the AS400 system. Going back to the data conversation,
Syntec, thank you.
who else is using the same kind of data that Commission on Aging wants, right? So there's probably someone else in the county or the city who wants that same information or is using that same information. Where are they getting it? And have a collaborative conversation about what data do we need, where is it today, what's missing, and is there an application out there? Does Oakland have an application? Does Mecosta, I have somebody have an
Kalamazoo.
application that is filling that role? And then look at how does that fit, given what else we have? Does it replace something? How do the costs come out? What's the hardware that is needed to support it? You know, what's the knowledge that's needed to support it? Does the vendor support it, or do I have to train someone to support it? That sort of thing. So that's an excellent example of a strategic conversation and how you have that. And then I mentioned inadequate fire suppression in the data center. That was not a biggie issue from the executives, obviously, but it's a biggie issue from the technical side because we've gone away from water-based fire suppression. But again, it's a biggie issue because it's a really expensive move to make. So that would need to be strategized as to where does that belong in the budget and when and what year. And it needs to be prioritized, you know, against everything else that you're trying to do. And that's part of your strategic plan as well, is if we have a list of this many things that we need to do, but we only have money to do this much, then someone needs to prioritize what spending is going to be done this year, next year, and the following year. I'm going to skip over this one pretty quickly because, again, it's very technical. Don's aware of it and has I've just now given him the details of what this is so they can address it. But again, as Tom mentioned, policies don't cost any money, so putting in policies. So what was mentioned in the interviews were training for IT applications and policies and practices. And one of the decisions that needs to be made is, does the department support the knowledge of the application, or is an IT person expected to support the knowledge of the application? So if you have 125 applications and you have 10 staff, is it realistic for every staff member to know that, 12 applications intimately? I don't know. There's some pretty smart cookies out there, so that might be true. Or is it more realistic for this person in the department to be the subject matter expert? You'll hear the term SME sometimes, subject matter expert. Does it make more sense for the person in the department to have the subject matter expertise? We talked about mixed generations of hardware, but we have mixed generations of workers as well. So you will have the worker who goes, well, I don't need to know that software. Somebody else can support that. Hey, IT guy, come over here and fix this for me. Wherein that software might be absolutely essential to running their department, and that person probably really does need to become the subject matter expert on that software so they can train a new hire on that software, as opposed to tapping IT on the shoulder to, hey, come do this training for me, taking IT away from the other IT initiatives that need to be done, right? But the other thing that was talked about in the interviews was training at the organizational level upon hire. So I had shared that at Trivalent Group, we do what's called a boot camp, and we run this every time we hire a couple of people. We have a boot camp, so they're sporadic in timing, and they last either like 3 half days or 2 full days, depending on the number of people that we have and the availability of the presenters. And we pretty much just lock them in a room and do a rundown where we have a different speaker in the room every so many minutes, and they talk about different aspects of Trivalent Group, and we call it trivalentizing our new people. So I don't know if you have anything like that at the county level, but it's an opportunity to introduce new staff to your county and your support services, but you can introduce them to the applications, the IT training that everybody has to know. So we teach everybody our ticketing system at boot camp. We teach all the new salespeople learn our sales quoting system. Everybody learns about the operating system that they're running on. We have a back-end monitoring system. Everybody learns that. So what I would call the baseline or foundational IT training all happens at boot camp when you get hired by Trivalent Group. So
I would assume, hire people in for specific skill sets. Did you find any cross-training taking place in terms of people learning we have some antiquated equipment. I bet that there's one person that knows how to run something, and if something happens to them, we're in deep trouble.
I did hear in some cases that there was a single person, but I heard in other cases that there was cross-training.
There is cross-training.
And one department even admitted to me that if so-and-so is absent, I know I can put in a service ticket, and then there is support there for continuity of support, but as long as so-and-so's here, I'm just going to talk to that person. I'm not going to put in a service ticket.
Well, I'm
so
sure
there was some acknowledgement that the service desk provides continuity of services, which leads me to believe there's
I
cross-training.
was just thinking, as busy as they are, there probably isn't much time for development. You're putting out
Absolutely.
fires all the
Right.
time, and so you can't cross-train if you're reacting all
Right.
the time.
Right, absolutely.
Well, the trend is to send the person that can fix it the fastest to some of that. So yeah, you lose those training opportunities to sit there and say, well, here's what you can do. We could send somebody else to let them take some time to fix it, because everything with IT is, now you want it done. So.
Also, if we had a fully staffed HR department, I would expect that function to go in and talk to Don and say, how can we help develop a curriculum architecture to train and cross-train and link and even give some basic skills to the people in the departments. Without that resource, that doesn't happen, but that would be one of the things that I would expect a strong HR department to do, was develop a curriculum architecture for development in IT. Other things as well, but certainly in IT.
It's true. I slapped a few hands, virtually, not physically, during my interviews. I asked people, one of the questions on the survey is, where do people in your department store their data? And some of them said their desktops. That's a problem.
Yeah, risky.
You need to be saving your stuff to the network where it's secured and backed up. So we had some fun conversations around that, and I gave a few lectures, and hopefully some action came out of those lectures. But the other thing that, so that's the acceptable use policy. You should have a policy in place that says you have to save your data on the network, and if you don't, there has to be a hand slap for that, because we just don't want that to be vulnerable, especially to those people that work on workstations. So with one person, the convincing story was, so what happens on your way home today, you get rear-ended, and you knock your head on the steering wheel, and you're like this, and your laptop, your county-owned laptop with stuff on the desktop, is sitting in the backseat of your car, and some little rat comes along and grabs it out of the backseat of your car. Now whatever was on your desktop is vulnerable to that person. Now, not everybody knows what to do with that, but some do. So you want to make sure that you're not storing things on your desktop, especially if they're leaving the building.
We will need to work with Don to differentiate between policies that could come out from the administrative level across the board and those that would be internal and from a department perspective.
Correct. Correct. Most policies are generated at the administrative level, because then they're enforced across the enterprise, right? We did not do a wireless assessment survey for you, but I didn't have any feedback, negative or positive, on wireless assessment. What that means is, does the wireless in your building or in your area work the way you need it to work? Is it reliable, that sort of thing?
You
So
would have heard if it wasn't.
I tend to believe that no news is good news. We didn't ask the question, but nobody brought it up as an issue either, so,
It is not always reliable.
okay.
I tried it tonight, and it didn't
Okay.
work.
Could that be a function that there may not be that many people using it here in the building?
I don't think
Where
there
everybody
are.
may be hooked up to a LAN or something where they aren't having to use wireless?
That could be, yeah.
I'm just
that could
throwing
be.
that out there to why you may not have as many people saying they don't have issues.
Right.
Is they may be hardwired, and Don may know that better than I do. but
Yeah, and that
obviously-
very well could be, yep. I would think about a purchasing workflow that involves the stakeholder input while adhering to established standards, right? That's probably, after all we've talked about, that seems like a no-brainer. Let someone suggest something, but make sure that it's standardized in how it gets purchased and when it gets purchased and who purchased it, that sort of thing. Strategic planning, have I said that enough yet tonight? License tracking of your software, your application deployments, that sort of thing. And again, lack of adoption of your ticketing system. There is a ticketing system available. People have to be held to the standard of using it so that you can have the data that gives you the perceptions of, is it working, is it not working, are users satisfied, not satisfied, what's getting fixed, what isn't, that sort of thing. So it's really hard to do
Well, it
that.
also will give us a true volume of the work that our
Yeah.
IT department's
Correct.
doing. Right now, we don't know.
I'd like to
Is
see
Don
it.
sitting with his feet up on his desk, or is he running 27 places in a day, And I think I know the answer to that
could probably
question,
look
but I
at
can't
mine.
document that.
Probably look at mileage reports to get that answer, right? It's a pretty big
Maybe I
county.
get you one of those Fitbits so you can
Yeah.
keep track of how
Your
many steps you
steps.
cover a day.
There you go.
They work.
Okay.
They do, yes.
So what are some of the next steps that we would recommend? So I talk about evaluating the IT department and doing annual reviews that include feedback from the people they work with, and that may already be in place. I didn't talk to Don about this. I didn't talk to your HR department. But one of the things that I'm really passionate about, and I oversee the engineers at Trivalent Group, I'm really, really passionate about staff morale and staff retention. This is a tough business, and it is so easy to get burned out in IT. And I know that's true of other careers as well. I'm not diminishing or minimizing anybody else's career. But one of the things that one of our strongest hiring strategies is that we support our IT staff with training. And I oftentimes allow them to have that training during their business day. So if Tim's going to go get training on VMware and get his VMware certification, I have to make sure that Eric is at his desk to pick up anything that might come Tim's way that week that Tim's out, right? So you have to have the staffing capacity, you have to have the budget for training, because vendors charge us for training. But that's really important to an IT staff member, especially if they get out of college, they come work in an enterprise like this. What's very exciting is the variety. Oh gosh, I'm going to learn this, and I'm going to learn this, and I'm going to work on this, and I'm going to work on this. That's amazing. So giving them an opportunity, and this can come out of HR as well, but giving them an opportunity to design an improvement plan that builds some training and new knowledge into their day-to-day work. Professional growth plans were appropriate. Some succession and attrition planning. We talked, so kind of goes back to what you were saying, Tom, that if somebody has the flu, and they're out of pocket, what does that mean to the department they're supporting? When I went to the hospital as the interim, one of the first things I asked the staff was, well, if you do that, who backs you up when you're on vacation? And they gave me this blank look. They never had a true vacation. If they were out in the middle of the lake fishing, they had to have their cell phone with them, and if the question came up about that thing that they supported, they had to answer the question. So I said, we have to stop this. So I put in a cross-training plan for all of them, and we implemented that every time somebody was going to be gone. It's like, okay, Ruth's going to be gone next week, and I want her to be totally off the grid so that she can enjoy, she was a birder and a photographer, so she can go enjoy that. So, Mary, you're going to have to stand in here for Ruth this week, and so whatever you have on your plate is going to have to take a second priority. And it's really just management, but it takes some thinking, it takes some planning, and we need to let staff have that opportunity. And then resource capacity planning. Again, without a ticketing system, I don't know if you really know how busy the IT staff is. I'm guessing they're uber busy because every IT staff I know is uber busy. So there is a couple of people that were mentioned in the interviews that I am convinced to work 24/7 because of the departments they're supporting are 24/7 departments. And I was impressed when one director told me how dependent they were on this person, and then when the other one told me they were equally as dependent, and they were in different focus groups, I'm like, holy cow, how is this person even surviving? So resource capacity planning means making sure that you're not working anybody 24/7 and that you have enough resources that you can fill those capacity gaps where they are. And then, again, your job, financial and operational reviews, making sure there's a greater standardization of and understanding of funding and budgeting. Not everybody understands why they're getting charged, what they're getting charged by the IT department because they don't understand the scope of services that is bundled into that. So I did just a 5-minute review of the budget. So in the IT department budget, you have personnel and benefits, as you would expect, but you have the underlying services costs as well. So equipment, maintenance, internal connectivity in your building or in your office, the internet, the telecommunications, the telephony. You have licensing and licenses. You have projected service hours. You have cell phones in there. The departments are charged back, and they're charged back based on a projected number of hours of support that could come from past years' records. It could come from forecasts of projects that need to go in. The internal network supporting the internet, again, I said that. The line of business applications that they're using, and again, equipment purchases and maintenance. And I got a variety of responses when I asked about how budgeting is done in individual departments. Some throw it all on Don's shoulders. Some ask him for feedback, which they very much appreciate. Some have dialogue that says, I need this kind of computer because I need this kind of a processor and I need this level of graphics card. So there's a variety of things that go on with budgeting, but some, like I said, are just throwing it all to Don to do, and others are working more collaboratively with him.
But I think that being said, when we look at the county budget by department, every department is charged an IT fee.
Correct.
I'm not sure that we can justify any of those IT fees. We've never tracked.
Because we don't ticket.
We don't track it, we don't ticket it, and, so we look at it, and, we have $100,000 charged to the sheriff's department or whatever it is, and it's like, where do we come up with that number from?
And that's where I would say, I would think that the chargeback for the underlying support costs, that's probably pretty obvious. That's probably just math. It's a portion of whatever, maybe by user. I don't think we want to drag Don into that tonight. But what's harder to quantify is the projected hours of support. And that's because, again, if we're not tracking it, then it's hard to.
And, you know, there's another aspect to this, too, this ticketing thing is, you know, we very well could provide better service with less need for IT support just by moving the Commission on Aging over to the empty offices over at the DPW building.
That's an issue.
I mean, we don't know. But maybe the Front Street building where the COA is the best place, and there's
Not a
virtually,
chance.
you know, I know, but I'm just saying, without tickets, we don't know.
Are you saying, Mr. Wheelock, that's a topic for another day?
Yeah.
Absolutely. The Front Street building is a long discussion that
And,
I'm more than willing to have.
and honestly, again, it goes back to
Not
Mr.
tonight.
Menzel, where he says, you know, you can't manage what you don't measure.
Right, absolutely.
And, you know, we've got to start measuring.
Yep. So assemble a strategic plan, I know, broken record.
Yes.
Disallow the current practice of purchasing applications in a departmental vacuum where it exists, because it's not across the board, but in some places. Develop a county-wide approach to continued development of the technology infrastructure, the underlying infrastructure. Bring the underlying infrastructure up to date, so there needs to be a budget for device replacement and the labor for that, and a plan for the continued maintenance, so financial and personnel in terms of resources. Some suggestions that you could take advantage of are partnering with a third-party IT company to bring the county IT into those industry best practices. Budgeting would require quotes for replacement hardware and labor, quotes for licensing and labor, for upgrades depending on the device. So that's not something that's just a boom, here, this is how much it's going to cost to do that. That takes a lot of homework. You can also partner with an enterprise-level IT company to automate the support and maintenance of the underlying infrastructure. So that's someone that works in tandem with the existing staff, but it takes away from them some of that care and feeding, and it allows them to work with the individual departments and support the department users and support the departmental applications and not have to worry about what's happening to that underlying infrastructure. So it does not reduce staff, but it brings the systems up to date and maintains them, which relieves the current staff of that responsibility and allows them to continue to serve in the roles that they are currently in. So
Would that be similar to just say outsource a help desk? So that you had somebody else doing that basic function of taking some information, trying to do simple fixes over the phone, and then having their department get into the meat and potatoes of everything?
it's a little different. When we talk about underlying infrastructure, it's an automated system, it's an installation on the devices that brings down updates from the internet and keeps them up to date. So it's not the same thing as a user calling into a help desk. I don't think there's anything.
More a back office type thing?
Yes, I don't think there's anything wrong with your current structure with your help desk, except we need to use the tickets more. But, and the stakeholders really appreciate the on-site presence of the IT staff and the department. So this just relieves the department of that burden of that care and maintenance of that underlying infrastructure. But there's a cost to that, right? So this is a plug number. I put in here, it's not a quote. You can't quote me on this. But you're probably talking about increased cost of $10,000 a month just to do that. Now, some of that is offset by, if the patching mechanism includes antivirus and anti-malware, then whatever you're spending today on antivirus and anti-malware, those costs go away. So it's not completely a new $10,000 a month, but it is costly to do that. What your strategy has to include is that better than hiring a new person? Would we rather have that $120,000 annually invested in a person versus an underlying automation? That's a strategic discussion that would have to take place before you. So these are just considerations that you might think about in the future. Cell phones. We had some conversations about cell phones in our executive sessions. If you haven't done this already, my suggestion would be to conduct a cost-benefit analysis Currently, IT is supporting 219 cell phones. I don't know exactly what that means. I can guess what it means because I hate switching cell phones myself, so I can guess the pain that they're going through. And I did work in an IT position at one time where we were providing the cell phones for the administrators, but then we decided to just pay them all a stipend and let them get their own. So everybody gets a flat fee, and if you want a $600 phone, you can get it. If you want a $50 phone, you can get it, but you're all going to get X number of dollars per month toward your using your cell phone for business purposes. Now, what does that mean for the IRS, for the county? What does that mean for FOIA for the county? I don't know. Don't need to know. That's your decision to make, but it might be someplace that you could look at. I already talked about the Microsoft Office piece. There is a very good checklist that Microsoft produces that can determine whether or not your organization or business is a viable candidate for Microsoft Office. But again, not necessarily any cheaper, but it does give you some efficiencies and it keeps the system up to date all the time. So that's a good thing. Okay, I promise I'm wrapping it up. So I'm going to put my teacher hat on. Here's my lecture. If you're not led by vision, you'll be driven by circumstance. And that's really how we got to where we are today, right? This is from a book called Good to Great, Why Some Companies Make the Leap and Others Don't. Jim Collins is the author. It's very, very readable. If you haven't read it, I would encourage you to think about adopting it as a board and reading it as a collective board and having some discussion on it. Like I said, it's very readable, it's very story-based, but what he discovered in his research is that there is not a magic moment in any good to great company. The real path is simplicity and diligence. It requires clarity, not instant illumination. So oftentimes when we conduct an assessment like this, we come back to deliver our report and people go, where's the silver bullet? I wanted to know when it's going to be fixed and how much it's going to cost me and how long it's going to take, right? Boom. There is no silver bullet. The analogy that Jim Collins uses in his book is a flywheel. That if you think about the Price is Right wheel, right? You pull and you pull and you pull and you pull and finally it gets going and then all of a sudden it just wants to spin and spin and spin. Because once you get the momentum going, then it'll keep going. But you got to get that flywheel moving before anything else can happen. Goals and expectations need to be defined and an overall commitment made to adapt new evaluative practices, a new culture allowing technology to become an effective tool to move the county forward. And as Tim mentioned, and Jim Collins says too, the breakthrough you're looking for cannot be achieved solely with technology, right? It's important, but it comes into play only after change has already begun. Strategic planning, cultural change, broad support for a long-term vision, a commitment to using technology to maximize your available resources, cost savings through new coordinated software selection and acquisition. Again, that's that functionality. What do I need it to do? Well, who else needs it to do something similar? What are they using? Oh, they don't have anything either. Let's collaborate on our selection. Let's go visit someplace that is doing that and see what they're using and what they like about it or don't like about it. Those efficiencies in data management will reduce staff time through integration of applications and systems. So you heard about some of the existing inefficiencies. This data gets input here, it's printed out, it's carried over here, this person puts the data in again, it's printed out, it's carried over here, this person puts the data in again. So there will be some staff time reduced through taking away that need to continually input that data. And you reduce your opportunity and potential for mistakes being made if you reduce that duplication of data entry. Correct, taking the manual out of it. Oh, let's see, have we not talked about some of these already? Technology vision, maintaining security measures, enforcing policies, establish cost assessments to departments that are understood, and that's probably just greater communication, and develop and enforce a formal change control process. I make it sound so easy, don't I?
Well, one thing that I know we can do right away is policy.
Correct. Correct.
That I heard loud and clear.
What's the good news? It's not all bad, right? The existing technology infrastructure that you have is business class, and it functions at an acceptable level in many, many, many of your departments. Not all of them. there is an overall positive perception of the IT department that is somewhat tarnished, as I said before, as a result of individual encounters and by reputation for being both expensive and misunderstood. So both of those are bullets that we can whack off at the same time, right? Greater transparency about what you're being charged and why, and what the underlying costs are that we're trying to reap. That's probably just a conversation among department heads. Many of the concerns we've discovered and shared are easily achievable tactical tasks that happen to cost money, and the remaining recommendations will come with a focus on strategic planning and therefore strategic spending, I would call it. Strategic spending will ultimately result in reduced costs. We do thank you for allowing us this opportunity. It was fun getting to know people and working in Traverse City and working in Grand Traverse County. It always feels really good to be able to say that we've delivered something that perhaps you didn't know and created some additional understanding around what you thought you knew.
I think you provided us with a great deal of information that will allow us to make some positive changes. Some right away, certainly most of them long term, but some right away.
Fantastic.
You know, I personally would, I think, and I've heard this from, you mentioned it, I've heard this from department heads, well, why do I get charged this from IT? And it's just too much money, and why do I, you know what? Well, you know, if we had a ticket system and people saw, you know, the services they were getting, perhaps it would, you know, and it would balance, I would think. We would know whether New World software is really as bad as the Sheriff's Department says it is. Maybe it's not. You know, I don't know.
I heard it works really well for some people and not at all for others.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that's probably the reality of it.
The building on Chairman Maxbauer's comments is the thing that it really brings out to me is somewhat intangible, but it's the need to develop people. I don't believe in this organization, maybe Don's or any of them, we do performance appraisals. Everyone deserves a performance appraisal each and every year.
Right.
Managers need to do career path planning, which is different than a performance appraisal. That gets into cross-training, that gets into giving people opportunities to grow.
Correct.
You don't do that unless the organization does it. It also just is real clear how badly we need a human resource department here that can do those things, and we don't have that. Also developing a curriculum architecture that, as we talk about the integration of software within the departments, the integration of basic skills that will allow managers to integrate between departments from a personnel perspective, and then drilling down into subsets of, like the IT department for cross-training and things like that, but all linked into developing a common managed vocabulary. We don't do anything like that. We're in the 60s, and it's doable. And I'm quite anxious to in addition to what you've done, is to get the people in place that can help us start these things. People are motivated if you invest in them in training. You don't invest in people you don't care about. You invest in people that you do care about and want to be a part of the organization. We badly need to do that. We just haven't done any of it.
Yep. Well said.
And I'm hoping that we can, as we grow and develop into a healthier culture, that's one of the things that we can do, which will link into helping people like Don have more opportunities to help manage their people in their departments to be even more effective.
Other
Mr.
questions
Newlock.
or discussion for Tim or I, or?
Well, you know, I find myself in a strange position because I'm asking a question I don't already know the answer to. Well, I don't ask questions in public I don't know the answer to. What does this assessment cost?
12,000?
11,700, I think, wasn't it?
It was in the email.
Somebody asked me about it, and I
email.
said, well, I
I think it was
didn't remember, so.
$11,700. There were three companies that bid for it. The Reamer and Associations had a division that did that. I3 Business Solutions out of Grand Rapids, who I've worked with in the past, did that. This group did it. The bids were from 42,000 down to 11,700. They were the low bidder, but I believe they were the low bidder because they had worked so much in the public sector that they knew what a project like this entailed. The others had done a few public sector ones, but not a lot of them. And that was one of the reasons they were chosen. It wasn't just price. They'd been in this world a lot more, and they were off the ground running quicker.
Well, someone had read the Ticker article and called me and said, well, how much are we paying for this assessment? I said, well, you know, I'm sure somewhere along the way I was told, but I couldn't remember the dollar amount. So the only other thing I'd like to hear, you know, while we're here this evening is I'd like to hear from Don about comments about the assessment and what we did. You know, Don's been here a long time. He knows our system better than
Yes.
any of the rest of us in this room. So,
Absolutely.
you know,
And us.
and I think we also, we acknowledge that we have shortcomings with our system. And, you know, as we move forward, we have to establish next steps. You know,
Absolutely.
we've talked about that tonight. And, you know, I'd like to hear just, you know, briefly from him tonight. And I'm pretty sure that we're going to hear a lot from him through the 2017 budget process.
Absolutely. Don?
I imagine that.
Don, did you find that this process was beneficial?
Well, I think so. I mean, it was definitely an independent view, you know, to see what departments said. I mean, they're going to tell Trivalent things that they would not tell me. So I think from that perspective, that was very good. Running the scan there, you know, that might be something we want to invest in also as the same software. So some of those things that they picked up on our network, that we would be proactively doing some of that monitoring ourselves.
What about the policy aspect of it? Writing tickets, making sure that there's a policy countywide where people are forced to save things on the network? Did you know stuff like that was going on?
I know that people do that, and whenever we see them, we try to encourage, no, don't do it. I think 2-3 years ago, because I saw one of the comments there, was IT told us to take stuff off the server. And we had a server that was filling up, and we asked people simply to go through, remove unused files. We didn't say remove anything that was critical, but I think a lot of people took that as a one-time, and we haven't been back there. And so I think from a communication standpoint, you know, that's a bad on our part to say, you really do need to be putting it on the server, because that is where it's backed up. And also, if they are taking laptops home, depending on the data that they're putting on them, yeah, that is critical information. So yeah, so I do think it's good. And, you know, obviously they're pointing out some things, some of the security scans we should be doing. We should have those in place. So, yeah, I just wanted to go through a few things I had written up here. Well, one of the things I thought, you know, the 3-year strategic plan, and I think that's great. And we used to do some plans, but the problem was we really didn't follow up on those. I mean, administration, the board, IT. I mean, I was guilty too when we did those. And so, you know, if we put that together, I mean, to me, we really have to make sure we come up with something realistic that we're really going to follow, that we're going to be able to do. I don't want to come up with one that we can't do it, or the money's just not there, and it sounded great. So that's one of the areas I'd really like to, and to have somebody, I mean, I can go through there and tell you all the old applications, I can tell you what we have from an inventory standpoint, but it is still, you know, how do we prioritize? I mean, with all of the different departments and everything, I mean, it's still going to take input from administration and the board to say, which ones do you want to do first? Which ones can stay later? You know, where do we go? What do we consider most critical?
How do you coordinate the city's needs, and keep in mind I represent the city, how do you coordinate the city's needs with the counties?
We really try to treat them just like any other department in the way that priorities are set, the way the technicians, that, you know, they have their own groups of departments that they support. It's really a little bit more up to the city, though, for some of their applications, you know, what do you want to do, and to make sure they're coming. And just in this last year, they did assign someone to be their GIS person. They put another person under them, and we've built about 5 or 6 servers for them for city DPS for a lot of projects that they had there. So they need to be a part of that plan to make sure that we have the resources to do both sides. So yeah, I think there's parts of that where we need to make sure they're involved in the plan to make sure that they're included too. So A few things, we talked about the IT cost allocation plan. I would love for somebody to go through that and look at it. One of the things, part of the document imaging issue, when we hired a person, the courts came, hey, we really need more support. One of my tax time is billed back as part of the licensing of the document imaging, which then seems to go, why am I paying so much for my document imaging? It's because I have a person's time built into that. Maybe that shouldn't be the case anymore. Maybe that needs to get split out. So there's quite a few different things, and I'd be more than happy to sit down, and if you know, I know we have a cost accountant that does other things for the county, and to sit down with that person and say, does it make sense with what we're doing and how it's distributed, and to put that out there and communicate that with departments so they do understand where their costs are coming from. And I think a lot of times too, just this year, I'm being billed $106,000 for indirect costs. And I think, you know, we get the defined benefit retirement. So there's these other things that are all getting thrown in there. And when they say, well, you know, that person certainly doesn't make that hourly wage, no, they do not. But when I throw in all those other costs and roll it in, that's where it comes from. And so if they saw those charges that come back to IT, they would also see that in there. So let's see. I did want to mention, we have asked for infrastructure upgrades and in the past, and the courts have asked for document imaging upgrades. But in the past, some of those died at administration when we were developing budget and just said, there's no money here. You know, these things just need to get dropped. You know, we can't do it. I've had budgets, and, you know, I'm going back to Dave and Dennis. You know, Don, you need to reduce your budget by $85,000. Figure out what we can live with and still function. And so, you know, some of those have been building. I mean, this isn't the first time we've been asked to reduce budgets. So, and there's also on page 16 there, it said that, and I'm not quite sure the comment, it said that cost is no object, and that's kind of the approach of our old culture. And I don't relate to that. That has never been IT.
I took that as old culture too when I read that.
Well, I know,
so I was kind of surprised.
but I have never done that. I mean, I have tried to bid, we've looked at capabilities, we've tried to get the best product for the best price, and to be efficient, I mean, that's why some of our network infrastructure is there. It's working fine. It is very old. It should be replaced, but if that statement were true, we'd have the best of everything sitting out here. Or we'd have Cadillac equipment when we didn't need it. And I don't think that that's the case in our environment. I have asked for in 2016, these are under capital items, to upgrade that wide area network to 10 gig. That's $120,000 as an estimate. We would go back and rebid that and see. The Windows auditing software, which would help us find those accounts that exist out there that are floating that people have left and we didn't remove, nobody's picked them up, that they're not there. The wireless network, it actually does. It needs to be upgraded. A lot of our access points are 8, 9 years old. We have a controller on there. We've actually already been checking systems out. We're estimating at $40,000 to replace wireless that would go across all of the county buildings on that. And we also have $10,000 for network monitoring software. So we were kind of waiting for this audit to go through, get completed, and find out, you know, where did these fit within that. And 3 of them are on the critical list, and along with the wireless, it's on my critical list. So we do want to move forward, but those costs are under there, and I worked with Dean on that last year, but really they show up as more, the first year was only a 10% depreciation. Then they did like a 20% for the next 4 years and a 10% in the last. So the money has to get spent up front, but yet IT really is not completely billed for that until a 6-year period is up. And we've been looking more at lease options. You know, are those available? Some of those do offer those at 0% financing. So in the past, I was kind of told, you know, we've got some cash available, let's just buy it. But I think in these circumstances, especially if it's true, it really is 0% financing, which I would want somebody from finance to verify that, that I would suggest those routes. And a lot of the equipment you can get in that manner. Let's see, we're also in the process right now of upgrading our virtual server software. So that was the one we're down a version, and so it was listed on there. While I don't consider that, I mean, it's in the critical list, I mean, that is a very stable environment and it does need to be upgraded. We're in the process of doing that. Also, our Active Directory infrastructure was one listed. We have 2 servers built. We've had them out there for quite a while. The problem is they've been in our environment for a long time, and the old ones, every time we shut them down, we find another thing that's hitting on them. And so we've been working our way through that. So we will be up to what they call the Active Directory Infrastructure 2012, and we should be there within the next month or 2 once we get everything worked out on that. They had that our firewall was at end of life, and I believe it was almost listed as not supported. And that is not the case. It is actually supported until September 30th of 2018. That is under full vendor support. We can load up some latest patches to get it up to the latest level, but we are supported on the firewall. There are newer versions out there, and we should probably still look at replacing it. They've got new algorithms that help catch things from coming through and getting there. In regards, Windows XP was mentioned as being in the environment. Yeah, we have 3 for the county. They're sitting on facilities management equipment to support some of their systems that are outdated, and there's no new software for them. I believe the city had 4, and those are just a few. They've got a couple applications that are requiring XP to run those. And I think we have 1 Vista. It's on a laptop that sits down in equalization, and they said, it's still doing the job for us. And so that's out of 850 computers. So we have been focused on those for the last 2 years of moving XP out of the environment. For the server 2003, those are some of the older servers that are sitting out there. Basically, it's quite a bit of work when it's not just, you upgrade the software. Usually you have to build an entirely new server. You have to reload all the software. And so we have several 2003 servers in different areas that we are focusing, and the plan is to have those done by end of year and have all of those out of the environment. Let's see. I also went through the list that Trivalent gave, and I did an IT response on every one of those. So in most cases, it's integrate, let's get moving, let's do something, help us out. A few of them I had other comments. So I've given those a copy to Jen and Tom. I just sent that this afternoon. So I went through and provided a response on each one of them. And let's see. The IT staff, we have been short 1 position. So we promoted someone to server administrator in the office, and then we have a technician who's 0.8 FTE, so they moved to the full-time. So our 0.8 FTE position is still open. And I guess I'm looking, and we were waiting for the audit to come through, and I would like to see if we can't get that position filled. I do think it's needed. That person has typically supported the public services building. They've also lended support to the 1 person we have at the Law Enforcement Center. They also support several departments at the building here. So right now that's been distributed amongst the other technicians that have been doing the work. So I guess I'm looking to see where that stands as to whether we're going to be able to fill that position or not. I also wanted to just go a couple of departments, one of them construction code, and this is just to give a couple examples. Right now we are working with planning and development, looking at a new application. And the report said, sometimes we're focused more departmentally. And in this case, really, we are kind of departmentally focused. One of the applications they've looked at is a cloud-based application. I believe that application could handle soil erosion. It could handle septic and well permits. It could handle driveway permits that are done by the road commission. It could handle land use permits coming from the township. You could end up with a single online portal where someone in construction could possibly go to do the entire process instead of saying, let's get a construction code application. So some of those require a lot of coordination. But maybe when we're looking at the system, we at least know that it has the capability to add those pieces to it later and go there.
Do they have the capability now to do anything in the field?
They do not.
Okay, and so this would enable them to sit there at the job site and make it a lot more efficient and say,
Right.
look, we could do everything here, and bam, we're done.
Right, well, some of the applications there, as soon as they do an online inspection and they say pass or fail, it's sending an email back to the contractor. Did you pass or fail your inspection? And here's the results of it.
Otherwise, you wait till 7:30 tomorrow morning to reach out.
Right, well, or they're calling the office. That's how they find out. Now, they're all phone calls back to the office. So now you can stop all the phone calls from coming, or they can log in and see the status of all of their things. We're also looking, could they do online submission of the plan, the building plans, do markup, and communicate the markup back and forth. So, I mean, there's a lot to do there, but when you get into those and you start making it a bigger thing, do you slow down the project? Do you add money to it? So, there's a lot of consideration in going there, but I guess you're right. When we look at those, we shouldn't say, well, don't just think about you, let's think about everybody, and then make a conscious decision of whether you're going there or not. I also have the prosecutor. I know they're the ones that are frustrated, I guess, by the charges, some of the issues that they've experienced. And I just kind of wanted to go through just a little bit of the history of my, I guess, history with the prosecutor. And, one of them, even when we brought OnBase into the prosecutor's office, this was before Bob was in there, a prior prosecutor, we really tried to convince them to build a workflow system. It really was a custom designed application for them. But, they were really still, they wanted a filing system. They wanted to control who got assigned each document. I want to make that decision. And it worked for them. But when Bob came in and said, I want this thing to pick up some of my work for me. I wanted to let it do some of that stuff, and it didn't. And, coupled with frustrations we had as we went through upgrades and stability of the system. We've really taken care of that. I mean, that issue, really since the beginning of the year, our stability has been there. I won't say we don't hit occasional issues. They're there. But, at the same time, though, when Bob looked at that, he went to a cloud system. And he knew the integration was not there with the courts and the police department. I mean, you might not like it, but he did know. We went to New World and we talked to them. They gave him a $25,000 proposal to create an integration that would pass defendant data or victims into the system, pass the documents that are stored in the system and move those over into the Carpel system. And so, I mean, we just have not pursued that proposal, and that's been over a year ago now, and I'm not sure it's valid. New World has since been bought out by Tyler, so they're now under another organization. But, I guess just a little bit of the history behind that, and, that really was a kind of a departmental decision to, hey, I'm moving somewhere else. And, the awareness was there that, if you want integration, it's going to be extra pieces that are going to have to be built later to make that work. And so, I mean, I feel for them. I some of the charges and where they're at, and I'm not sure they're completely off OnBase. He hasn't told me I can have the licenses back yet. So, we still have things to work out. So, just as a couple of examples of departments where we're in there. So, but other than that, I'm fully in support of this, and wherever we can work to move forward to make sure IT is providing the best service, that's what we want to do.
Well, I think many places just don't realize how much of a backbone of any organization the IT department is anymore. I mean, everything is now technology-based, to the extreme. Some places more than others. But, I don't want you or your department by any means to take this as, some slam on you, because quite frankly, there's a lot of this that I saw in the audit that I expected to see. A lot of the legacies, any organization like this, you're going to have a lot of older systems and that kind of thing. One of the things that's really, like my iPad here, let me get it back up here, but where it was talking about the one chart that showed down times and the repetition of that, it was really impressive. I don't know if everyone had seen that chart or not. It was on page 29. But, I mean, your department is doing great with what they have. And I applaud you for what you and your people are able to do with what you have. I know the county's put a lot of constraints on you, but I think you've done a very good job.
Well, I have a lot of good people supporting me.
Tom, you had your hand up?
Well, we'll set up a time with Don, and I'll ask Jen to join us, and we'll sit down and go over this and see what the administration can do in collaboration and set up a implementation plan for implementing some of these recommendations, and we'll we'll set some timelines and things like that. So either this week or certainly next week, we'll get together and have a planning session and develop some action steps that we can both implement.
Well, I would like to thank you, Tom, for finally looking at IT seriously. For what, 6 years? It's been in the county, on the county board strategic plan, and no administrator until you has addressed IT in this manner, where it was looked at independently. There are recommendations, i.e. policies, that we can do right away that will, I think, make everybody's work and information a little bit better. And as Tina said, policies don't cost anything. So I appreciate the fact that you went ahead with this. And Don, your department is not the only department that's going to be looked at. By the time Mr. Menzel's done, every department's going to get a close look, an independent look, where it points out where we as a county can do things better and coordinate work between and, interact with departments.
Well, it gives you that baseline. I mean, we've
Yeah.
never had a baseline.
No, not
I
ever.
mean, even the simple thing is the tickets.
Yeah.
If that was enforced, you would know, how many tickets are you using a year? How long are you taking per department? You'd be able to better budget based on department then to say, look, here's how much time we're spending in your area. So, every time we do audit, for everybody that is watching, I don't know why you'd be watching it, but for anybody that is in the county is watching.
If anyone's awake.
Don't take the audits or any of this as, any type of punishment or anything bad. We're just trying to all get a baseline of where we're at so we can move forward. Because until you have that measurement, you can't do a whole lot. And I mean, the best of intentions in years past have been to try to help in different departments, but the financial just hasn't been there.
The way I look at an audit is never, and I got you. It's a validation of what you're doing well, what you can do to enhance what you're doing well, and what you can change to get better.
Yep.
I think organizations should do them every 3 years. I mean, when I was managing large organizations, I had them a lot, and I never was threatened by them. I thought, I think I'm doing some good things, but I'm not sure. If I'd like to find out if I am, if I can do them better, I'd like to know that, and I want to get better at what I'm doing. So it's never an I got you. It's just a help, and I think good, healthy organizations look upon that outside look as a very healthy process, and I think it should be done, if you can, every 3 years. It just is a good validation of what you're doing, but also you have your benchmarks established. You can build off your benchmarks and see what kind of progress you've made.
And the key, though, is like you mentioned, too, and we've mentioned before at various meetings, is what do you do with it once you get it? If all we say is, okay, that's great report, we'll see you later, then we move on to something else, we haven't done our job either, because we have to keep focused on what are we doing with the information, because if we're not doing it to improve the organization, then we are wasting money.
Well, Don, Jen, and I will sit down, and we're going to use the plan as a document to base action steps. I want a strategic plan done. I want to see policies that will be changed to make them current and best practices. We want to do an inventory assessment based on immediate needs, what do we need, and can we fund it, in a 3-year plan for funding. So that's what we're going to be doing, and then we use that into the budget process and moving forward. And then we have to maybe make some tough business decisions, but if we have a critical component that Don needs that interacts and links and saves money, then maybe we prioritize something else and get that done, But again, it allows us to measure the effectiveness of how we allocate funds to get the best return on the invested dollar.
And Tom, another thing that does concern me, and it's just based on personal experience, is employees saving things to the hard drive of their computer versus on the network. And again, it's personal experience. My sister had her laptop in the back of her car,
Stolen.
and somebody smashed her car window,
Yeah.
and what she lost was pictures that she had on her hard drive of her 2 daughters growing up. And I have to tell you, she cried for a day and a half about that. And so now because she didn't back stuff up, you know, people say, oh, in the back of their mind, well, you know, I'm going to back it up, and maybe they do it
Yeah.
occasionally. But, so now I'm going through my computer disks and my hard drives, and I'm emailing her as many photos as I can. But, I mean, it's just something simple. Somebody just comes along and smashes the back of your car window out in a parking lot when you're in Myers getting a
Well, we'll have
carton of milk. I mean, it happens.
Building on that analogy, we'll have a discussion on what we can do policy-wise, how we can reinforce it, and how we can move forward to protect some of those issues, you know. So, you know, that's part of the discussion that we'll have.
All right. Well, I thank you. Thank you, Mr. Weber. Thank you, Tina, Don, and Mr. Menzel. Jen, thank you both for doing this. This is our second opportunity for public comment. Please.
I promise I won't talk about a bell. I can't hear it. Hi, Steve Weaver, County Line Road down in Kingsley, Michigan. I'm here representing myself. At this point, we'd like to take a moment to thank the county for taking the time to do this audit, to look for any possible weaknesses that you may have. I know that I took the time to go through the report. I saw nothing glaring, nothing that I felt was really bad, except for one small item. And I'm sure that Don has already taken care of that. Item number 2. The part that I don't like about it was the fact that you were called out as to what operating system you're running. This is a public document. It's now been opened up to all the hackers out in the world. Right here's a flaw in how to get in. So, hopefully, and I believe Don has already taken care of it from the comments that I heard, but you know, you want to get it updated to at least the most secure on it. Just to help keep the stuff, because I've been a resident for over 20 years. I've got a lot of information on your system. Another item, I know I keep hearing the comments about the policy and making changes of policy, and I definitely give Christine and Tom kudos for saying we need to start using the ticket system to be able to track our items. I know that's going to be a fight, because I work with, where I work at, we've got a system, but the ticket system doesn't always work, and it's still easier to grab that IT person. And so the IT person becomes the royal pain when they say, I can't help you right now, you have to follow policy. So there's going to be those little issues. And then one other item that I've noted down here is in this entire presentation, I haven't heard anything about training. And specifically the training of malware detection for all of the county employees, for the city employees, to help identify some of the malware emails, the phishing attempts, the spear phishing, the CEO attacks, to help prevent a virus from coming in. Now again, this may be something that Don's already been working on, because I'm not part of the operation here, I do not know. But that's something that you should look at doing and training, especially with the crypto lockers and all of the encryption and what's happening with them. Because we don't want to become, some of the other counties that have happened out there, other hospitals, the Lansing Board of Power and Water and Power, whatever it is, they got hit by one. So you need to look at investing the money to help protect yourself that way. So with that, again, thank you very much for taking your time to do this.
Thank you for taking the time to come.
Thank you.
Anyone else? All right. We are adjourned.
I don't.